Dharma Bites is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
One of the big things that coloured her youth, which was the shadow of nuclear war. So Joanna Macy's comparable sort of generation, and I think that coloured her whole evolution. So she became aware of nuclear weapons, nuclear power, nuclear everything, and it triggered off a whole process in her. And it wasn't so much nuclear war, that's bad enough, but just nuclear power. So in America, in the 70s, I think, they had a couple of very near misses with their nuclear power stations, which were all hushed up and made secret, but it all leaked out, so to speak. 3 Mile Island was the big one. And she kind of realised that we as a society were generating this stuff, nuclear waste, and we hadn't got the faintest idea what to do about it. And that it was going to be around for periods of time that we just had no ability whatsoever to deal with. So she started looking into it, and the more she looked into it, the more kind of disturbed she got. She went to talk to the engineers, and they were building these big concrete buildings or underground mine shafts to put the stuff in, which were going to last 100 years. Fantastic. But 100 years is like 1/10 of 1% of the half-life of these things, which is nothing, is it? Absolutely nothing. So that led, that was the kind of big starting point for her spiritual activist journey. And a lot of the kind of concepts she's most thought through come out of that. So I'll just mention a couple of them. So the first thing is, she feels the biggest danger we all face is almost not nuclear stuff, but what she calls apatheia. Apatheia. Where we kind of know about all the problems, but it's all too much, and you just switch off. You just can't cope, so you just shut down. Apatheia. And then it's a kind of not knowing, and you just turn away. But then if you're challenged, you kind of harden up. You move into a more cynical, defensive mode. Buddhism calls it willful ignorance, where you're willfully determined, to not know. So it starts off apathy, and then it becomes willful. And that's the worst thing, she says. So her big book, which is there, is called A Work That Reconnects. So the first step for her is finding ways to reconnect with the reality of what's going on without despairing. So then she led to a whole body of work called Despair and Empowerment. And I think she's written a book, I haven't actually got it, so I'm not sure, called Despair and Empowerment in a Nuclear Age. So despair is obviously quite a painful emotion to feel, but from her point of view, at least it's an emotion. At least it's not apathy. So you've come to life a bit. You're prepared to look at the world and despair. Great. But then the next step is empowerment. There's a little echo of this, I was thinking, in more traditional Buddhism, the myth of the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara. So up on the wall, one of our cosmic bodhisattvas is this image here, the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara, who started off vowing to relieve all the suffering in the world, the whole lot. And he plunged into it, and he did this and he did that. For hundreds of years he did this and that. Then he looked around, and he'd only solved 1% of the suffering of the world, probably less. And then he had a moment of despair. And in that despair, he cracked up into 1,000 pieces. And then the Buddha, Amitabha, who's up the top, came and put him back together again, a bit like Humpty Dumpty, into this new form with 1,000 arms and 11 heads and all sorts of ways of doing it. And he was able to go forwards in a new sort of way. So that, anyway, maybe despair is not a new thing for Buddhists who look at the world and the suffering in the world. So 2 other things came out of her nuclear power activism. One was the whole notion of deep time, where here we are living on planet Earth, and, we're going to live 50 years if we're lucky, 100 years if we're super lucky, but that's nothing compared to the time periods we might need to look at. So a whole thing called deep time, which I could talk about more later, but there's exercises in the book. The other one was the need to come together as community to have an effect. So one person trying to oppose, nuclear power or something, can frankly do nothing. You just get knocked back, shut down. So the power of community organising. And then I suppose the third one was that you just have to see life as a whole. So something like nuclear power, nuclear waste, nuclear war, nuclear anything, is going to affect all life, absolutely unconditionally. There's no way that anybody is going to opt out. So very strong realization that all life is interconnected, all humans and all life. And you just had to sort of take that perspective. And so one of her early essays, which is in that book there, World as Lover, World as Self, is kind of making the case that once you start looking at the world and once you start seeing things this way, you kind of instinctively broaden out your concept of the self, because you realize you can't just think about me. You just have to see the whole world as yourself, in that anything that happens to the world, in a sense, happens to you, and anything happens to you happens to the world. So the essay is called The Greening of the Self. And it's about almost instinctively generating an imaginative identification with the rest of life. You almost can't help it, which is a really positive, really natural consequence.
We hope you enjoyed today's Dharma Bite. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.